used to think family gatherings were predictable. Polite smiles, safe conversations, the same old stories recycled over dinner. But one night in Los Angeles proved how wrong I was. 2 weeks earlier, I'd finally been promoted to marketing director after years of 16-hour days, and I bought myself a Tesla, my first real reward. When my mom invited me to her 60th birthday, I went hoping for peace. I had no idea that night would unravel everything I thought I understood about family. A week before the party, I almost convinced myself we were normal. Mom had called her voice softer than I remembered, and for a moment, I let that small shift mean more than it probably did. It's strange how quickly hope can rise when you've spent years living without it. I thought maybe time had rounded the sharp edges off our family. Maybe we had all grown up a little. But history has a way of whispering the truth back to you. Growing up, the rules in our house were clear even when no one said them out loud. Ryan was protected. I was prepared. When Ryan broke Dad's favorite watch, an expensive one, he used to brag about Mom, called it an accident. He didn't mean it. She said already, cleaning up the pieces. When he failed 2 classes in the same semester, it wasn't because he hadn't studied. It was because his teachers didn't understand his learning style. When he crashed his first car, Mom blamed pressure. When he lost yet another job, she sighed like the world had wronged him again and said, "He just needs another chance, another chance." Those words followed him like a safety net. I used to watch those moments quietly from the doorway. Not jealous exactly, just aware. Aware that if I broke something, it would be called careless. If I struggled, it would be called weakness. If I failed, it would be proof that I hadn't worked hard enough. Dad's logic was simpler and somehow heavier. He believed men needed more room to stumble because the world was harder on them. He said it casually once at dinner, cutting into his steak like it was common sense. Boys need space to figure themselves out. I remember staring at my plate, wondering what that made me. In my world, there was no space to stumble. There was no room to figure myself out. There was only expectation, so I adapted. While Ryan drifted between interests, music, 1 month, business ideas, the next, I learned how to hold 2 jobs while carrying a full course load. I worked through college sometimes, closing a late shift and opening again the next morning. I skipped vacations. I turned down dinners with friends because I couldn't justify the expense. Rent didn't wait for self-discovery. There were nights I studied until my vision blurred, telling myself it would be worth it someday. Not because anyone demanded it. No one hovered over me with pressure. In fact, no one hovered at all. Independence wasn't praised in our house. It was assumed. Mom used to say I was lucky. "You're so strong," she'd tell me almost proudly. "You don't need help like your brother does." I didn't know how to explain that strength can feel a lot like invisibility. By the time I landed my first real job in marketing, I had already learned not to expect applause. Promotions came slowly at first. I earned them one by one. I stayed late. I volunteered for projects no one else wanted. I built something steady brick by brick. And when I was finally promoted to marketing director after years of 16-hour days, I let myself feel proud. Not loud pride, not the kind you post about, just quiet satisfaction. The first thing I did was buy a Tesla. It wasn't about the brand. It wasn't even about the car, really. It was about what it represented. I had dreamed about that car since I was a teenager, scrolling through pictures of it late at night while calculating tuition payments in my head. It felt like proof that all those small sacrifices had led somewhere. The day I drove it home, I remember pulling into the driveway and turning off the engine, slowly, just sitting there with my hands on the steering wheel. The house looked exactly the same. Same trimmed hedges, same polished front door. No one came outside. I told myself they probably hadn't heard me. I walked in, keys still warm in my hand. Mom was on the couch scrolling through her phone. I bought the car, I said, trying to keep my voice light. The Tesla. She glanced up briefly. That's nice, dear. Then she went back to her screen. A second later, she started talking about Ryan's latest idea, a podcast this time. He was sitting at the kitchen counter smiling like he'd just closed a major deal. He was still living off Mom's credit card, but somehow the room felt arranged around his potential. I stood there for a moment, waiting for a question. What color did you get? Can we see it? How does it drive? Nothing came. It wasn't anger that settled in my chest. Anger is hot. This was colder, heavier. A quiet disbelief that no matter how far I climbed, I would still be standing alone at the top, waving down at people who weren't looking up. The irony is, I never truly blamed Ryan. He had grown up inside the cushion that was built for him. Why wouldn't he lean into it? If someone keeps catching you every time you fall, you stop being afraid of the ground. What unsettled me more was how naturally my parents played their roles. Mom called my independence a blessing, as if it excused her from offering support. Dad talked about responsibility and resilience, but only in my direction. I learned to save my words. Nothing I said changed the script. So when that cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox, the invitation to Mom's 60th birthday, I held it under the light a little longer than necessary. The gold lettering shimmered elegant and deliberate. For a second, I let myself imagine something different. Maybe this was the moment things shifted. Maybe we could sit at the same table without comparisons hanging in the air. Maybe she would look at me, not as the daughter who didn't need help, not as the responsible one, not as the afterthought, but as someone she was proud of. I even bought a new dress. Simple, elegant, nothing that demanded attention. I told myself I was going to celebrate her, not prove anything. But somewhere deep down beneath the calm I'd trained myself to carry, there was still that small, stubborn hope that this time they would see me. The invitation arrived on a quiet afternoon, tucked neatly into my mailbox like it had been waiting for the right moment. Cream envelope, thick paper, my name written in careful script. When I slid the card out, the gold lettering caught the light 60th birthday celebration at the Los Angeles Event Hall. Elegant, formal, intentional. For a few seconds, I just stood there on the sidewalk holding it. Mom had called earlier that week, her voice softer than usual. Not overly warm, not emotional, just gentle enough to make me pause. "I'd really like you there," she'd said. And I heard something in that sentence I hadn't heard in years. Not obligation, not expectation. Something closer to invitation. I told myself maybe time had changed us. It had been years since we all sat down together without tension simmering beneath the surface. Years since a gathering didn't feel like a performance. But 60 is a milestone. It felt important, symbolic. If there was ever a night to start fresh, this would be it. So I said yes, a gift she'd love. I pictured her a gift she'd love. I pictured her introducing me to her friends, not as an afterthought, but with pride in her voice. "This is my daughter Eden. She just got promoted." Simple words, but they mattered. I didn't need applause. I didn't need a spotlight. I just wanted that look, the one that says, "I see you. I'm proud of you." A few days before the party, I went shopping for a dress. I told myself it was just practical formal venue, over 50 guests expected. But the truth is, I wanted to show up as my best self. Not flashy, not competitive, just steady and confident. I chose something simple but elegant, a dress that fit without trying too hard, something that said I belonged in that room. Standing in the fitting room under soft lighting, I caught my reflection and wondered what she would see when she looked at me that night. Would she notice how much I'd grown? Would she see the years of work, the discipline, the independence? Or would I still be the quiet daughter who didn't need help? I kept telling myself not to overthink it. This wasn't about proving anything. It was her birthday. I was going to celebrate her, to honor the woman who raised me, even if we hadn't always understood each other. But hope has a weight to it. Every time I imagined the evening, there was a flicker of unease I couldn't quite name. A memory of past gatherings where compliments felt uneven, where attention tilted in one direction. I brushed it aside. People change. Families evolve, don't they? The night before the party, I laid the dress out carefully, shoes beside it, clutch on the dresser. I even rehearsed a small toast in my head just in case. I wanted peace, not a dramatic reconciliation, just one calm, unguarded evening where we could sit at the same table without comparison hanging between us. Looking back now, I realize how badly I wanted to believe that was possible. The Los Angeles event hall was already glowing when I arrived. Soft gold lights washed over round tables dressed in white linen. Champagne glasses caught the glow and shimmered like tiny mirrors. More than 50 guests filled the room. Family friends, business associates, women from Mom's social circles. Laughter floated through the air, light and polished. A string of quiet music played somewhere behind the conversations, just loud enough to feel elegant without interrupting anything. For a moment, standing near the entrance, I let myself breathe it in. Dad stood near the center of the room, deep in conversation about markets and projections, gesturing with the kind of confidence that made people lean closer. Ryan was nearby, laughing easily, nodding at compliments tossed his way. He looked comfortable, admired, at home in a room he hadn't built. I slipped toward a corner table, greeting people when our eyes met, smiling when it felt appropriate. No one was unkind, but no one lingered either. I told myself that was fine. Tonight wasn't about me. When Mom finally stepped forward, the room shifted without being asked to. She held a microphone in one hand, her dress catching the light. The chatter softened, then settled into silence. She looked radiant, composed, proud, perfectly at ease in front of a crowd. I remember thinking how peaceful it all felt. She cleared her throat gently, smiling the kind of smile she used whenever she was about to turn something into a moment. Tonight, she began her voice, carrying smoothly through the speakers. I want to make a special announcement. There was a ripple of anticipation. A few guests leaned forward. Someone lifted a phone already recording. She looked directly at me. "My daughter Eden," she said. Pausing just long enough for the spotlight to feel real, will be giving her Tesla to her brother Ryan as a symbol of family love and support. The words didn't land all at once. At first they hovered, almost abstract. Then the sound in the room disappeared. Forks stopped mid-air. Glasses froze inches from lips. The quiet wasn't gradual, it was instant, like someone had cut the power. 50 pairs of eyes turned toward me in unison, waiting. My pulse thudded in my ears. For a second, I wondered if I had misheard her, if this was a joke that hadn't reached its punchline yet, but she was still smiling. Ryan's expression flickered surprise, then something else. Not embarrassment. Not exactly. More like expectation settling into place. I felt the weight of the room pressing against my shoulders. Not one person spoke. They were measuring me, measuring my reaction, waiting to see if I would nod, laugh, play along. My heart was racing, but my voice, when it came, was steady. That's not going to happen. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The sentence cut clean through the silence. The smile on Mom's face stiffened. Dad's chair scraped against the floor. He stood slowly, the movement heavy and deliberate. I could see the red rising up his neck, spreading into his cheeks. A vein pulsed at his temple. The room seemed to shrink as he stepped toward me. Eden, he said, his tone low, controlled in a way that felt more dangerous than shouting. You will do as your mother says. I didn't move. For a split second, I thought he might stop, that pride would hold him back, that he wouldn't risk making a scene in front of his colleagues and friends. But pride can twist into something else. He closed the distance between us. The slap came faster than my mind could process. A sharp crack split the air loud enough to echo off the walls. The sting bloomed across my cheek before the shock did. My head snapped slightly to the side. I tasted metal. My earring loosened and hit the floor, rolling somewhere beneath the tables. No one screamed. Someone gasped, soft, startled. And then there was silence again, worse than before. The music had stopped entirely. I hadn't even noticed when it cut off. A few guests still held their phones halfway up, frozen between recording and lowering them. I saw flashes of screens. Some had started filming before the blow landed. Ryan was staring at the floor. He didn't step forward. He didn't speak. He didn't tell Dad to stop. His shoulders were slightly hunched, like he wanted to disappear without actually moving. Mom stood on the stage, gripping the microphone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She didn't rush toward me. She didn't scold Dad. She didn't say my name. That was the moment something inside me shifted. This wasn't shock. It was choice. I straightened slowly, my cheek burning, my ears ringing faintly. I expected tears. They didn't come. I expected anger to explode out of me. It didn't. What I felt instead was clarity. I bent down briefly, but I couldn't even see where my earring had rolled. It didn't matter. I lifted my chin and reached for my clutch. The room was watching like this was theater, like I was the unpredictable part of the script. I wiped my lip with the back of my hand and looked at my father, not with fear, not with defiance, just with something steady. Then I turned and walked toward the exit. The whispers began before I reached the doors. Low at first, then layering over each other. Words like unbelievable and did you see that drifting through the air. The marble hallway outside felt colder than the ballroom. My heels clicked sharply against the floor, each step echoing behind me. I didn't hurry. I didn't look back. When the doors closed behind me, the sound of the crowd became muffled, reduced to a distant hum. Outside, the night air hit my skin cool and grounding. The city lights reflected off the polished hood of my Tesla parked near the entrance. For a second, I stood there breathing. My hand trembled slightly as I pulled out my phone. Not from fear, from finality. I scrolled to a name I had saved months ago, but hoped I would never need to use in a moment like this. John Carter. The call connected on the second ring. "It's happening now," I said, my voice calm in a way that surprised even me. There was a brief pause on the other end, then his steady reply, "Stay where you are. I'm on my way." I ended the call and leaned lightly against my car, staring back through the glass doors of the hall. Inside, I could see silhouettes shifting. Mom still near the stage, Dad standing stiffly beside her, trying to regain composure. Ryan seated again, staring at his hands. The band hesitantly resumed playing as if pretending normalcy could erase what had just happened. But something had already cracked, and there was no pretending that away. I stayed outside, leaning against my car, the cool metal grounding me, while the sting on my cheek slowly dulled into a steady throb. Through the glass doors of the hall, I could still see movement, shadows shifting, people pretending to resume their conversations, the band awkwardly filling the silence with music that sounded thinner than before. Everything inside had changed, even if they were trying to act like it hadn't. About 20 minutes later, the doors swung open again. Conversations inside faltered almost immediately. Heads turned. I didn't need to look to know why. John Carter walked in with the kind of calm that doesn't ask for attention but commands it anyway. His suit was perfectly pressed, his expression composed. He didn't rush. He didn't hesitate. He moved straight toward the center of the room as if he had rehearsed this moment 100 times. The music stopped again. From outside, I could see my parents stiffen near the stage. The confidence they had worn so comfortably earlier was gone, replaced by something tighter. Uncertainty, confusion. John greeted the room politely, his voice clear but measured. He introduced himself as my attorney, not loudly, not aggressively, just a simple statement of fact. Then he placed a leather folder on the nearest table and opened it with deliberate precision. "I'm here," he said calmly, "to clarify a legal matter concerning the ownership of a certain vehicle." The words carried across the hall like a line drawn in permanent ink. Mom stepped forward, first, smiling nervously. "This is just a misunderstanding," she said, her tone light but strained. "We're celebrating." Emotions got ahead of us. John didn't look at her. He lifted a document stamped signed official and held it where the nearest guest could see. He explained that the Tesla in question was registered solely under my name, purchased with my personal income, fully insured under my account. No transfer had been filed. No shared ownership existed. There was nothing to debate. Each sentence was delivered evenly without anger. That made it heavier. Dad stood rigid, hands clenched at his sides. His eyes darted around the room, now no longer the commanding figure at the center of attention. Guests who had once leaned toward him were leaning away, whispering, reassessing. A woman near the back quietly gathered her purse and slipped toward the exit. 2 others followed, careful not to draw attention to themselves. Phones were still out, some lowered, now others discreetly angled. Ryan stared at the floor, fiddling with his cufflink as if it required urgent attention. The smug ease he'd worn earlier had vanished. In its place was something small, exposed. John closed the folder and faced the room. The vehicle belonged solely to Eden Grant. That was it. No dramatic flourish, no raised voice. Just a final statement that hung in the air, undeniable. Even the waiters had stopped moving. Mom opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. Dad's shoulders dropped slightly, just enough for me to notice from across the glass. For the first time in my life, I saw something close to defeat in his posture. Inside the party didn't resume this time. I didn't go back in. I didn't need to. I watched for another moment, then slid into my car and drove away, the city lights blurring at the edges of my vision. By the next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. At first, I assumed it was work, a client issue, a scheduling problem. But when I opened my notifications, my stomach tightened. Someone had posted the video. The title was blunt. The Tesla slap. It showed everything. Mom's announcement, my refusal, the crack of Dad's hand across my face, the silence that followed, even the moment I walked out. Within hours it spread, millions of views, comments multiplying faster than I could read them, people dissecting every second, some defending family unity, most calling it what it was: entitlement, abuse, public humiliation. My name was everywhere. At first, I didn't know what to feel. The humiliation was real. Watching that moment replayed by strangers felt like being exposed under harsh fluorescent lights. But beneath that was something else, a strange, unsettling vindication. People saw it. They saw what I had lived with quietly for years. By noon, local news outlets across Los Angeles had picked up the story. Some blurred my face, most didn't. Commentators debated loyalty versus boundaries. Clips looped on morning segments. Online articles dissected body language and family dynamics like it was a case study. Then the consequences began to move. Dad's company, Grant Financial, faced immediate backlash. Partners suspended contracts citing ethical concerns. Investors began pulling out. Employees quietly resigned, unwilling to be tied to the controversy. A company built on reputation doesn't survive long when that reputation fractures publicly. Mom's world shrank just as quickly. The Women in Business Association she'd proudly served for years released a carefully worded statement thanking her for her past contributions and announcing her removal from the board. Her social circle, once eager to attend every event she hosted, went silent. The house that had seen charity galas and networking dinners now sat behind closed curtains. Ryan didn't escape it either. His friends, at least the ones who had enjoyed the comfort of his connections, unfollowed him one by one. Group chats went quiet. The girl he'd been bragging about stopped responding to his messages entirely. The cushion he'd always landed on wasn't there this time. For the first time, he wasn't being protected. My inbox filled from a different direction. Hundreds of messages. Then thousands. Strangers writing to say they had watched the clip with tears in their eyes. Daughters who had been overlooked. Sons who had been favored unfairly. People who said they finally felt seen. In the middle of the noise, I sat on my couch phone in hand cheek, still faintly tender. I hadn't planned any of it. I hadn't set out to expose anyone. But the truth had surfaced anyway, raw, unfiltered, undeniable. The internet had turned my private humiliation into something public, and in doing so, it had stripped away the illusion my family had built for years. The silence that followed that night in the hall was no longer just ours. It belonged to everyone who had watched. 2 weeks later, the knock on my apartment door startled me. No one ever showed up unannounced. For a second, I assumed it was a delivery. I checked the time, hesitated, then walked over and opened it. My parents were standing there. Mom held a bouquet of white lilies. Dad stood slightly behind her, his shoulders rounded in a way I had never seen before. They both looked smaller, not physically, just diminished, like the air had been let out of something that once stood too tall. For a moment, none of us spoke. Mom tried to smile. It trembled before it fully formed. Her eyes were red as if sleep had been avoiding her. "Hi, sweetheart," she said softly, and her voice broke halfway through the word. Dad cleared his throat, gripping the flowers too tightly. "We thought we should come see you." There was no authority in his tone, no command, just uncertainty. I stepped aside and let them in. Not warmly, not coldly, just enough. The apartment felt unusually quiet once the door closed behind them. Mom placed the lilies carefully on the counter. "They're your favorite," she said. They weren't. I didn't correct her. She had always remembered details about Ryan, his favorite meals, his preferred brands, his changing hobbies. With me, she guessed. Dad looked around the apartment as if searching for the right place to begin. He inhaled slowly, then let the words fall. "We've lost everything, Eden." He said it plainly, no dramatics. "The business is gone. Investors pulled out. Contracts were suspended." His jaw tightened. "We may have to sell the house." Each sentence landed like a stone being placed between us. Mom's composure finally cracked. "People won't even return my calls," she whispered. "The association removed me. Our friends." Her voice faded. I waited. There was a pause long enough to feel deliberate. Then Dad said what they had really come to say. "We need your help to fix this. Not 'we miss you,' not 'we're sorry,' not even 'are you okay?' We need your help." The clarity that had settled in me since that night didn't waver. "You didn't lose me," I said quietly. "You threw me away." My voice didn't shake. It wasn't anger anymore. Anger burns hot and fast. This felt colder, solid. Mom covered her mouth as tears spilled over. She reached for my hand instinctively, like she used to when I was a child crossing the street. I stepped back, not to hurt her, not for drama. I just didn't have the strength to pretend comfort where there wasn't any. Her hand hung there in the air for a second before falling. "We made mistakes," Dad said, barely above a whisper. "We thought we were doing what was best." "You were doing what was best for you," I replied. The room felt smaller after that. Mom wiped at her cheeks with the back of her hand. "Please, Eden. We're still a family." The word sounded fragile, thin. I wanted to believe it still meant something. But family built on obedience and silence isn't the same as family built on respect. And respect can't be restored with flowers. My phone buzzed on the counter. All three of us glanced at it instinctively. "Ryan." I picked it up. "I'll try to change." That was all the message said. No apology, no explanation. Just a promise floating in empty space. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, then turned it face down. There were no words left that could bridge what had been broken. Mom looked at me one last time, searching my face for something. Permission, forgiveness, rescue. I couldn't give her any of it. I walked to the door and opened it. Dad understood first. He gave a small, slow nod and placed a hand gently on Mom's back, guiding her toward the hallway. She hesitated at the threshold as if waiting for me to call her back. I didn't. They stepped out. The lilies remained on my counter, their scent too sweet for the room. When the door clicked shut, the silence felt final, not sharp, not loud, just steady. And for the first time, I chose distance over the comfort of pretending. 3 months later, the noise had softened into something distant and manageable. Eden's new apartment sat on the 12th floor of a quiet building across town, smaller than the house she grew up in. Smaller even than the condo she once shared during her brief attempt at family-approved adulthood. But this place felt earned. Sunlight pooled across pale wooden floors each morning, and the balcony overlooked a line of jacaranda trees that were just beginning to bloom. There were no white lilies here. Her life had narrowed in the best possible way. Fewer social obligations, fewer performance dinners, fewer rooms filled with expectations. Work became her anchor. 2 weeks after the viral video cycle piqued her company's board, called her in, not to question her, not to distance themselves, but to promote her. The footage had shown something: unmistakable composure under pressure, clarity, restraint. Investors appreciated that. Leadership recognized it. She accepted the promotion without fanfare. It wasn't triumph she felt walking out of that meeting. It was steadiness. At the same time, legal matters moved quietly in her favor. The shares her father had once held in trust structures tied to her name, shares long used as leverage, as implied loyalty, were formally disentangled. With John's guidance, she reclaimed full ownership. The paperwork was methodical, unemotional. Numbers instead of accusations. Contracts instead of raised voices. Her father's company, meanwhile, had stabilized but smaller. Several long-term partners had withdrawn after the public backlash. Media scrutiny had faded, but the caution lingered. Industry insiders had long memories. Her mother's social circle had thinned. Invitations arrived less frequently. Charity galas became quieter affairs, without photographers angling for proximity. Ryan's update came indirectly. A mutual acquaintance mentioned he was working independently, now consulting modest projects, no longer leveraging family introductions. There were no public statements from him after his brief message promising change. Just silence and perhaps a quiet reckoning of his own. As for the media, it had done what media does best: moved on. Another scandal, another headline, another family implosion to dissect. Occasionally, though, Eden would receive messages, emails forwarded through her assistant, direct messages filtered by security settings, women from different cities, different ages. Some shared stories of financial control disguised as love. Others simply wrote, "Thank you for saying no." She read everyone. Some nights she sat on her balcony with her laptop closed, city lights blinking beneath her, and let the weight of it settle. Not the humiliation anymore, not the slap echoing across marble floors, but the strange clarity that followed survival. It was during one of those evenings that John had first mentioned the idea. Public moments fade, he'd said, over coffee in his office. Sleeves rolled up, tone measured. But structural change doesn't have to. They began meeting weekly. not as attorney and client navigating crisis, but as collaborators. The concept formed slowly a nonprofit focused on women's financial independence, legal literacy workshops, asset protection education, guidance on understanding ownership before emotions complicated it. Eden insisted on one principle above all dignity: not rescue, not spectacle, not revenge, education. They drafted mission statements, identified initial funding streams. Eden contributed part of her reclaimed dividends without hesitation. John brought in pro bono partners. Quiet groundwork replaced public drama. For the first time in months, her name appeared in articles for something other than scandal. Small business publications, community forums, panels discussing economic autonomy. No microphones thrust at her. No pointed questions about family betrayal. Just thoughtful conversations about agency. Her new life wasn't louder. It was clearer. There were still moments passing a Tesla dealership, hearing a certain tone in a crowded restaurant that stirred memory. But the memories no longer dictated her choices. Distance had become her boundary. Work had become her focus. Purpose had become her answer. One afternoon, standing in her unfurnished office space that would soon house the nonprofit's first staff, Eden ran her hand along the cool edge of a conference table and allowed herself a private acknowledgement. She had not been thrown away. She had stepped out, and in stepping out, she had stepped forward. Late afternoon light stretched long and golden across Los Angeles as Eden guided her Tesla onto the Pacific Coast Highway. The city moved around her in familiar currents, glass towers, catching fire in the sun palm trees, bending toward the ocean breeze, traffic humming with its usual impatience. 3 months ago, she would have driven through these streets with a tightness in her chest, bracing for whispers, for headlines, for the echo of a slap that once seemed to define her. Now the road felt open. She lowered the windows and let the salt air move through the car. The sound of the engine beneath her hands was steady, responsive hers, entirely hers. The realization didn't spark triumph. It settled deeper than that. Self-respect, she understood now, wasn't pride or defiance. It was survival. The quiet decision to protect what could not be rebuilt once surrendered. Saying no that night hadn't been rebellion. It had been preservation. The ocean came into view, vast, indifferent, and less. She parked near the shoreline and walked barefoot across cooling sand. Waves folded into themselves, patient and rhythmic, as if rehearsing the same lesson over and over. Return to yourself. Return to yourself. Eden sat close enough for the tide to brush her toes. The horizon blurred, where sea met sky, a soft seam of silver and blue. For the first time, she allowed the memories to surface without resistance. Her mother's raised microphone, her father's anger, Ryan's silence, the lilies at her apartment door, the stunned faces, the headlines. They no longer stung. Forgiveness, she realized, did not require reunion. It did not require dinners or apologies or rebuilt facades. It required release. And release could happen alone. She could wish them healing without reopening the door. A gull's cry cut through the air, sharp and fleeting. Eden exhaled slowly, feeling the steady weight of her own heartbeat. Independence was not rebellion against love. It was alignment with truth and peace. This unshaken, unperformed calm was louder than any public confrontation. The tide rolled in again, cool against her skin. In the fading light, with the city behind her and the ocean before her, Eden understood something simple and irrevocable. Walking away had not diminished her. It had returned her to herself. If you're standing at a crossroads right now, torn between keeping the peace and keeping yourself, I hope you choose yourself. I learned that approval can disappear overnight, but self-respect stays. Choosing peace isn't weakness. It's strength that doesn't need applause. If any part of this story feels familiar, you're not alone. Share your experience in the comments if you like. And if stories like this matter to you, stay connected.